Okay, I'm going to create some video lessons for this chapter, so if you happen to be writing a test or maybe didn't catch all of what we covered in the lesson before Christmas, then I just figured it would be possibly helpful for you to be able to watch it or look back at certain parts of it. So I'll divide it into sections so that it's not as much to look through if you're only trying to find a certain topic. The first one will be on homeostasis. So, when we started this chapter, we talked about homeostasis, and this term you've seen before when we talked about it in terms of the cellular level. So, basically, our body works to try and maintain homeostasis. So it's really important that you understand what homeostasis means. Homeostasis is, and you can read it here yourself, but I'll try and explain a little bit more. It's a relatively stable internal physiological environment. All of your body systems kind of work together in order to maintain it. So it doesn't mean there's nothing happening. It just means that if there is a little change, then it's brought back to normal, or it may look from the outside like things are maintained at the same level all the time, but that's because of small changes that are happening all the time. So we call that dynamic equilibrium. And the way that it's maintained is through internal control mechanisms that are continuously working to oppose any small changes that happen within your body. So for instance, if your body temperature went up a little bit, then things will happen inside of you to try and bring it back down a little bit. We talked about just basically listing a few things that must be kept at a constant level. In order to kind of talk about it, I'd asked that you come prepared for class, so a number of people were able to share some examples of things that must be kept at a constant level. So things like your body temperature, like I just mentioned, or blood sugar levels, or oxygen, carbon dioxide, glucose, any of those. Okay, there's lots of other things that we're going to learn about too, like even your blood pressure, your heartbeat, hormone levels, you name it. There's lots and lots of things inside of you that have to be maintained at a fairly constant level. And then we worked on a little activity trying to brainstorm as many body systems as you could. And just for fun, we tried to see how many you could list. So if you try and think about all the things that you do, or what you have to do, or what kind of things even in the long run that your body is meant to do, then you can, rather than memorize all your body systems, try and think, okay, well, what are these parts? What do they work together to be? Or what job do they have? Okay, so we have to digest our food. So one would be digestion, for instance. We have to get the things that we digest around to all the parts of your body. We have to get oxygen around to all the parts of your body and things like that. So we need a circulatory system and so on. So this was listing as many as I could. And sometimes certain systems might be named one way, or they may be taken as another type of name. So for instance, we have a nervous system. Okay, so the nervous system and the endocrine system are two systems that are important in controlling body functions. But sometimes, because they work so closely, they might even be called the neuroendocrine system. That's what I mean by sometimes they're named differently. Respiratory system, so you're breathing, trying to get oxygen into your cells and carbon dioxide out. We'll spend a little more time on that one next chapter. Circulatory system, main focus of this chapter. Digestive, we mentioned. Excretory system. Now that one might be more specifically speaking about your urinary tract, so then you call it the urinary system, but the excretory system includes more than just that. endocrine system, we mentioned. That one is one that deals with endocrine glands and hormone production. Your reproductive system, your immune system, the skeletal system and muscular system, which may together be called the musculoskeletal system, and the integumentary system. Now, last chapter we learned a little bit about integument, and that basically means your skin and all the things that your skin produces, like your hair and your nails and all those sorts of things. So there's two main types of mechanisms that are involved in maintaining homeostasis. We have physiological mechanisms, and physiological mechanisms are basically ones that you don't really have to think about. Your body automatically will do them inside of you, and they're internal responses. So when your body temperature goes down, for instance, if you're cold, then physiologically your body will turn on certain reactions that will release heat in order to warm you up from the inside. The other type are behavioral mechanisms. So in that case, your brain is going to interpret and then kind of direct you to do something about it in order to make you warm again. So for instance, if you're cold, you might get a sweater, or you might get a blanket, or you might curl up by the fire, or you might snuggle with someone. Okay? Most of the time, these types of mechanisms work through what we call negative feedback loops. So, there are, it says 3 parts to a negative feedback loop, I would argue that there's really 6. The 3 main parts are key things inside of you that do work together, but in order for them to kind of be triggered, or for them to do what they need to do, there's really 6 kind of steps that happen. So the first thing is a stimulus, a perturbing factor. Then a stimulus, and then the stimulus is detected by the sensory receptor. So a sensory receptor is basically a receptor that is able to detect changes in internal conditions. It sends information to your integrator, which in us is a brain, which processes the information and sends directions to an effector. And the effector is a part that does something to try and return conditions back to normal. So it's usually an organ or gland or a muscle, and it will perform an action which will bring about the last thing, which is the response. So hopefully you can see this okay. It's kind of stretched here, but this one is showing the 6 things that I mentioned. So the perturbing factor, and some might find it easier to see if you have it all in one continuous line instead of all kind of looped around like this. But basically we have a perturbing factor, which serves as a stimulus, or causes a stimulus where there's a slight change from what's normal. This is detected by the sensor. The sensor sends a message to the integrating center, which compares conditions, interprets the information, and sends a message to the effector, which causes changes that can bring about a response, which is to return it back to normal. So, once things are kind of back to normal levels, then these earlier steps will be turned off. And that's what we refer to as a negative feedback loop. So when things get back to normal, there's a negative feedback mechanism which turns off earlier steps. An example for this, we did talk about the thermostat. I think you're okay with this one. This one was actually discussed in your book. So the simple idea is if there was an increase in temperature, the sensor in the thermostat detects the increase in temperature, sends a message to the integrator within the thermostat. If it's been an increase in temperature, the idea is to bring it back down. So it will send a message to the effector, which is the air conditioner, in order to lower the temperature back down again. Okay, the other side is showing the opposite. So if there's a decrease in temperature, the integrator will send a message to the heater, which is the effector, that will help to bring the temperature back up. And that's just a picture showing the same thing. So in terms of regulating body temperature, you've seen these terms before. We have warm-blooded and cold-blooded, basically, and these are other terms that are used to describe those types of organisms. So if you're warm-blooded like us, then you'd also be called a homeotherm or an endotherm. And they're basically organisms that maintain a relatively constant body temperature and are able to adjust their temperature inside by adjusting their metabolic rate. So in other words, they turn on reactions that release heat in order to bring their temperature back up, that sort of thing. We can also use behavioral mechanisms like grabbing a sweater, that sort of thing, but we're able to maintain fairly constant body temperature from within. So that's us mammals and also birds. Cold-blooded. The other terms used for cold-blooded organisms are poikilotherm or ectotherm, and basically they're organisms whose body temperature relies on the environment. So if it's cold out, then their body temperature is going to be cold. If it's warmer in a certain area, then their body temperature is going to be warm. So they rely a great extent on behavioral mechanisms. So if they're cold, then they tend to go out in the sun in order to warm up. If they're hot, then they might go in the water or go find a tree to go under in order to cool off. So their habitat is kind of limited by the temperature range that they can exist in. Many animals will fall somewhere in between, but we're going to be focusing on humans since that's us. So this is a schematic diagram showing regulation of body temperature in humans as an example showing the negative feedback loop. We talked about it briefly in class, but I'll show it here for those who weren't able to see it. So in this case, the perturbing factor is the sun. Then it causes an increase in our body temperature, which serves as a stimulus that can be detected within your body. So sensors in your body detect the increase in temperature and send a message to the integrating center in your brain. Okay, so our brain interprets the information, says, oh, we need our temperature to go down. So it sends a message to effectors. And this is just showing examples of two of the effectors that would be caused to respond to what's happening. So the blood vessels would dilate and your sweat glands would release sweat in order to try and bring the body temperature back down. So when blood vessels dilate, that means that there's going to be more blood going out near your skin. And so the heat that's being carried in the blood can just kind of pass through out into the environment. So that's why when you're hot, your blood, your skin tends to be more red because your blood is right near your skin so that you can release some of that heat. Anyway, the idea is by getting these effectors to do their job, we can cause a response of bringing the temperature back down to normal. And once it's back down to normal, then these earlier steps will be shut off because your brain will then detect that it's back down to normal, so there's no need of doing these steps anymore. Okay, the bottom half shows the opposite. So if the perturbing factor is snow and ice, it's cold, then the body temperature is going to drop, which serves as a stimulus that's detected by sensory receptors in your body, which will send a message to your brain, the integrating center in your brain, and that will interpret the information and send a message to the effectors in order to try and get them to do the job of trying to get body temperature back up. So in this case, it causes blood vessels to constrict. So less blood is going to go out near your skin. You tend to look paler because your blood's not out near your skin. Okay, you want to try and keep the warmth on the inside of your body to keep your main organs warm. It also causes your skeletal muscles to contract so that you shiver. It causes the hair to stand up in your arms and legs. So these changes will bring about an increase in your body temperature, which is the response. And when that temperature gets back up to normal, then these earlier steps would be turned off. So that's negative feedback. Okay, and we indicate negative feedback with a dashed arrow and a negative sign to show that it's negative feedback. This is just showing a comparison of vasoconstriction and vasodilation. And it's not always just related to heat, controlling body temperature. Sometimes your blood vessels will constrict or dilate in order to regulate blood pressure or other things that are going on in your body. So vaso refers to vessel, and constriction means to kind of narrow in or make smaller. So vasoconstriction will occur in one instance when your body temperature is lower. It causes the blood vessels to narrow out near your skin, so it prevents heat loss. Vasodilation, on the other hand, causes them to open up, so there's more blood flowing out near your skin so that the heat can be released into the environment. So it would be a good compare and contrast for you to practice. Homework, I didn't really assign this at the time, but you should have an idea of what a positive feedback mechanism is. Our body doesn't tend to work using positive feedback mechanisms as much. In fact, most positive feedback mechanisms, they kind of lead your body in a direction away from what makes it in a healthy state. So it takes it away from maintaining homeostasis. For instance, if someone was to take a drug and your brain is interpreting that, the feeling of that drug, and you kept on taking that drug, even though it's causing a lot of damage to your body, that would be considered a positive feedback mechanism. Okay, so the way that we name it, negative feedback mechanism and positive feedback mechanism, seems opposite to what it should be, in that negative feedback mechanisms are actually good for us. They're more positive for us because they keep our body in check. Positive feedback mechanisms tend to be things that are going to lead our body to an unhealthy state in a lot of cases. So, okay. So, this activity was to kind of brainstorm some of the roles of the circulatory system in maintaining homeostasis, and we kind of brainstormed what based on what kind of things you can find in your blood, even at any time. If they took a sample of your blood, what could they find, and what would be carried by your blood vessels to meet the body's needs. So we brainstormed a few things, and then we checked to see if we had most of them. But the easiest thing you can do is kind of think, okay, well, what kind of things are being carried in my blood? And if I can think of some of those things, then I can kind of backtrack and write it out as a role or a job that the circulatory system has. So I'll show them here, but one of the biggest jobs that it has is to try and get oxygen to all of your cells. So one of the jobs is to carry it from where the oxygen is picked up, which is in your lungs, and carries it to the heart and then to all the body tissues. Another thing it does is it carries nutrients. So when we digest our food, then we absorb the food in mostly around our small intestine. So our circulatory system picks up the nutrients from the small intestine and carries it to the rest of your body tissues so that all of your cells will get the nutrients that they need in order to function. Carbon dioxide can also be found there. So carbon dioxide that's produced from your tissues will be picked up and carried to your heart and then to your lungs so that we can breathe it out. It carries other wastes from cells to organs of excretion, so the liver and kidneys and your skin. It helps to fight disease. So if you think of what other things might be in your blood, then you might have some white blood cells there that are ready to attack invaders, or you might have antibodies there to direct the response. Like we just saw, it helps to regulate temperature. So it carries warm blood to your extremities so that you can get rid of heat. It prevents your blood from going to your extremities if you're cold, so that it'll keep your internal regions warm. The important organs like your heart and your brain. It carries hormones to target tissues. So it carries them from where they're made to the target tissues so they can coordinate body activities. It also helps to heal wounds. It's got clotting factors floating around in it so that at any time if you have a cut or something, then it can form a clot right away to kind of plug that spot that's been injured and help you to heal. So these are just some of the functions of the circulatory system. Would I ask you to list them all? No, but you should be able to think of what is floating around in your blood and some of the roles that your circulatory system plays. Do all organisms have a circulatory system? No. The simplest organisms are so small, like unicellular euglenas and paramecium that we've studied, that all they need is simple diffusion. If they're one cell big, then materials just exchange in and out of their cell. But more complex multicellular organisms require a circulatory system in order to get materials to every cell, or from every cell to where they have to go. There's two types of circulatory systems. There's open and closed. Open simply means that it may have a pump and vessels, but at some point these vessels open into spaces called sinuses that basically the blood sits there and it bathes the tissue. So right around here would be a sinus that has a pool of blood that bathes the tissue. If it's a closed circulatory system, like in us, then you have a pump and vessels. The vessels are connected by capillaries, but the blood never comes out of the vessel. So the red blood cells and all the particles that kind of make the blood keep traveling through blood vessels and then back to the heart and then back to the tissues and so on. So they're always traveling within vessels or within the pump itself. Yes, materials can go in and out at the capillary level, but the red blood cells and other things that make it blood are still traveling through the vessels. They don't leave the capillaries. So, what is required in a closed circulatory system like ours? We need three main things. A system of tubes, which in our case are blood vessels, or spaces for the fluid to move through. Second, we need a fluid to carry the materials. So in our case, the medium is blood. And third, we need a mechanism to move the blood through the tubes, which is a pump, and in our case is a heart. Alright, so I'm going to stop here.